All right, so our first speaker is going to be Liz Bohannon. Quick introduction. She's the CEO of Seiko Designs. It was really cool. When we were curating the list of speakers and investigating who should come and speak, Liz was always at the top of the list. It was so hard to find somebody who had a for-profit business that had this really cool drive to see local and global change within culture. So she's going to give that story, and I want us to give us a super warm welcome to Liz.
What now? Okay. Good. Ready? Okay. Hi. Hey, everybody. I held you in suspense for a second. Thank you so much for having me. There are a few things that are more energizing and fun to chat about, I think, than entrepreneurship and culture and where those things collide. So I've got 20 minutes, so I'm going to dive in and tell you a little bit about my story. This is my life. I spend a lot of time in East Africa and all over the continent. We own a vertically integrated manufacturing company in Uganda. In addition to that, we have a global supply chain, and so I spend a lot of time in factories like these. And there's one factory in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that I spend quite a bit of time in. And when I'm at this factory, I spend a lot of my time in what is generously referred to as the design lab. And the design lab is like an 8x8 room. It has no windows. It's got these big draft tables. And as you can see, it's just like floor to ceiling with like leather samples and old shoe lasts and different tools. And I work on designs or product development or sourcing stuff. And every day, the bell rings at about noon, it's actually at noon, and the entire factory goes to lunch. So we all leave the factory and we walk over to like the canteen, and typically I hang out with these guys and we play some bottle top checkers, and then I finish up and have some coffee with the ladies, and then we all go back to the factory together. And during that hour, they lock down the factory. They don't want anybody in the factory. They want everybody taking the hour-long lunch break. And so one day, I was back in the design lab, and I was working on a project, and I was like really focused. I was going home soon, and so I knew I really needed to work through some things. And so I heard the lunch bell ring, and I was like, I'm gonna work through lunch. And I kind of have an agreement with some people, and they know that they can just leave me back in the design room. So I'm working through lunch. I'm like working fervently. I'm like, working on this stuff. And I have no idea how much time has passed. And all of a sudden I hear this like, and it goes completely dead silent and pitch black. Now, I'm in Ethiopia and we lose power all the time. So it's like, that's not that big of a deal. But typically when we lose power, it's like when you're in grade school and like the lights go off and everybody kind of starts like giggling and, moving around, and you hear people talking, and then the generator kicks in, and so it gets really noisy, and it was just completely dead silent. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. So, my first thought growing up in the evangelical Bible Belt was like, oh my gosh, left behind, here we go. Left behind, all my Ethiopian friends apparently had a good thing going on, and I'm the only one that's left. My next most logical thought was the correct one, which is, oh my gosh, it's Saturday. And on Saturdays, the factory only works for a half day. So when that bell rings at noon, it's not the lunch bell. It's the go home for the rest of the weekend and be a normal human bell. And so I realized that it was Saturday. I had no idea how long ago that bell had rung, how long I had been in this factory by myself. So I walk outside of the design room. It's completely pitch black. I'm navigating my way through, all of these machines and cords and all of this stuff. And I finally make my way to the front of the factory. And I realize that my worst suspicions are confirmed. I am indeed locked inside a shoe factory. And it's completely pitch black. There's these big steel doors. And I kind of panic. So I hear these two voices in the distance. And it's really, really faint. But I'm like, oh my gosh, someone is still here. So I pick up a shoe last, which is luckily really heavy and hard. And I just start banging on these steel doors as hard as I can. I'm just banging on these doors. And I'm panicking. And my Amharic is already not very good. And so the only word that I can think of that's coming to mind is salam, which is Amharic for it's basically the main greeting. It literally translates to peace be with you, right? So ironically, I'm just banging up against going, peace be with you! And these voices get a little bit closer, and they get a little bit closer, and I realize I recognize them. They're these two little old ladies that are basically like the factory secretaries. So they make their way towards the door, and through this tiny crack in this steel door, we manage to have a conversation without actually sharing any of the same language. And I managed to explain, like, hey, I'm the crazy white girl, got myself locked in your factory. And they managed to kind of explain, like, ooh, that's tough luck, because the one guy that has a key is like 2 hours away now. And so they stand outside, they're like on their phone, they're going back and forth, they're running, and finally they get a hold of this guy. Literally, you guys, it was probably 3 hours later that I'm just like, we're just going back and forth at this point. It's just like, da-da-da-da-da-da. Literally, we don't speak the same languages, but we're having this conversation through a steel door. They stay with me for the entire 3 hours until I get rescued. And the guy comes back, and he rescues me out of the factory, and I didn't have to spend the night there. And this was the celebration that ensued. My favorite part's coming up, and booty slap. Nothing like a little Ethiopian booty slap to celebrate. And y'all, what I love about this is that I promise you for the rest of my life, if I was walking down the street in Manhattan, right, and I saw these two women, I will never forget them for the rest of my life. And I have a feeling I've made myself equally somewhat unforgettable, because our stories have now been intertwined in this really meaningful and messy and experiential way. And these women, in a lot of ways, in that day, in that moment, still 2 years later, I consider them my heroes. They were my heroes. They saved me. And I think one of the things that I think about when I think about this story is how deep that desire is within each of us, right? Everybody wants to have a moment, and everybody wants to be a hero in an interesting story. And so often in leadership, I think we think about, what does it mean to put myself in the position of being the hero? And I think true and great and transformational leadership and culture happens when we start thinking about, how do we pave the way for other people to build lives of purpose and passion and impact, and to be the hero in that story. To back up a little bit, so I went to the University of Missouri, and I studied journalism, and I was really, really interested in issues that were facing women and girls that were living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. Now, for years I've told this story, and I'm going to be really honest and say, when I would explain this part of my story, I would very flippantly say, I went to college and I studied journalism, and I was super passionate about issues facing women and girls living in poverty. And over the last couple of years, I've really started thinking about the language that I've been using and if it's helpful or not helpful. And I realized that I don't think it's actually the most accurate thing to say that I was super passionate about this issue of women and girls living in extreme poverty. Because when I look back at myself in college, in hindsight, I can say I was, but I was really passionate or interested in a lot of things. It happens to be that over the next 10 years, this was the passion or the interest that I really ended up building a life around. But the reality is, I think, and I'm going to say something that, especially talking about culture in 2018, makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, that passion might be a little bit overrated. I'm starting to notice that this narrative of going out and finding your passion and following your dreams sometimes can be inspiring, but also sometimes it can be incredibly heavy. And there's a lot of people, in fact, 80% of people, when asked what they're passionate about, can't answer that question, right? If 80% of people can't answer a question that actually doesn't have a right answer, it makes me wonder, like, is this the best possible question that we could be asking people? Because I meet a lot of people, whether it's, recent college graduates or people who've been in, their careers for 10 years who are really struggling, who are really confused and kind of stressed out about this idea that they haven't found their passion yet. And it becomes this really kind of heavy thing that everything else in life can't fall into place until you find your passion. But I would argue that perhaps instead of talking about passion, we could talk about interesting problems, right? Interesting problems are everywhere. Interesting problems, that's really low-hanging fruit, to look out in the world and to see what are things that you're interested in? What are problems that exist out in the world, and how can we be a part of creating the solution? And I really deeply believe that we do not find our passion we build it, right? We take steps in a certain direction, and sometimes we make mistakes, and then we have to iterate, and then we have to change course, and then we discover something new. And by having this posture of experimentation and of being open and being interested and of being willing to be surprised, I truly believe that people are more likely to build really meaningful lives of purpose, passion, and impact. So I was in school. I had this interesting problem, women and girls living in extreme poverty and conflict. And so I moved to East Africa. I got a corporate job right out of school, realized about 3 months in that this was not the track I was supposed to be on. Looked for kind of my dream job that I could be really passionate about, and to be honest, couldn't find it, right? Turns out the New York Times, not super interested in hiring you to like travel around the world and pay you to tell stories when you're 22 and you've never really had a real job in journalism and you've never left the United States before. They don't want to send you to Baghdad. Okay, fine, whatever. Heard you loud and clear. So I couldn't get this passionate dream job. And so I finally just decided that I would just go on my own, that I would move to East Africa. I quit my corporate job. About 2 weeks later, I bought a one-way plane ticket to go to Uganda, and I decided that I was going to go show up, and if no one would pay me to be a journalist, I was just going to be a journalist and see what happened. And so I showed up in Uganda, and I just started asking interesting questions about what are the actual issues? What are the real challenges facing women and girls living in this community? And I was really, really surprised by what I learned. I traveled all over the country. I learned about all of the things that you would think that I would learn about, and all of the statistics that in my head I kind of already knew, but it took on a new reality, right? As I'm living in this community and I'm exploring and I'm asking these questions. And as part of that journey, I ended up meeting an incredible group of young women in between high school and university. These young women were top 5% of students in their country. They tested into college, but they were getting ready to go into a 9-month gap between high school and college. And many of them were getting into college and then moving back home to their villages for that 9-month gap, and 2 things were happening. One is that they couldn't find jobs. You know, they're in areas of the country where there's over an 80% unemployment rate, and they're competing with young men in the villages for the same opportunity. And 2, there's this loss of social support, right? So they've spent the last 2 years at this leadership academy with other really bright, driven, like-minded young women. And then they move back to their villages and face all of this pressure like dowry and bride price to get married, to have kids, to not continue their education. And all of a sudden, this huge, interesting problem, this macro problem of global extreme poverty and women and girls living in the bottom billion and gender discrimination became really, really, really narrow, a really specific, really interesting problem. And that was figuring out a way to bridge the gap for these young women to continue on to university. So the first thing that I did, because I'm like this very idealistic journalist who, shows up in Uganda, a couple things about me that you should know, that is, I shouldn't tell you as the CEO of a for-profit fashion company. When I was in university, there were 2 things that I really didn't like. The first was business. I really believed that business was part of the problem, and if you were interested in business, you were greedy and you just wanted to kind of build up your own little kingdom, and it doesn't matter, who was oppressed in the process. My dad's whole side of the family was like in finance and real estate, and I was like very adamantly the black sheep who was like cared about people and studied journalism. The second thing that I really hated was fashion. I thought that if you were interested in fashion, you were shallow, you were materialistic, and you definitely had no idea where Syria was. So I was really fun to have at sorority parties, you can imagine. And so here I am in Uganda, the only idea that I have for how we can fix this problem. It's like, duh, women living in poverty in East Africa, I'm an American, let's start a charity. No brainer, right? And so I kind of started walking down this road, and I started a sponsorship program, and we were going to match up women in the U.S. with women in East Africa, and based off their career interests. And I felt really good about this. Felt great about the idea. I felt really good about me being the person that did that, right? I had background working with kind of advocacy organizations and human rights kind of advocacy campaigns, and so I was like, I can definitely do this. And I still, luckily, had this journalism hat on, right? I still had this hat on where I was like, I'm going to ask really hard questions about the future, what's actually going on, what are the implications, how sustainable is this? And I basically came out of that investigative journalism on my own idea session realizing that I could not start another charity. That if I was going to do something for this specific problem in this specific region, that it needed to be market-based, that we needed to be creating jobs, that we needed to be contributing to the local economy, that we needed to be supporting the overall infrastructure of the region. Now, from a journalism kid that hates business, this was a really, really hard idea to swallow, right? So my next idea was, well, I wish I could say that we immediately went on and, started this great chic fashion brand and that we were featured in Vogue and that, celebrities like Sophia Bush wear our products. But the reality is my next best idea was to start a chicken farm. Naturally. My market research, I took 0 business classes, but I knew the term market research, right? I'm going to go do some market research. Seems like people love chickens here, right? There's like chickens in the market. That guy's got like 98 live chickens on the back of a bike. Like, this is going to be gold. We're just going to make and sell chickens. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. I wish I could say that no chickens were harmed in the making of this story. I am not well suited to run a chicken farm. Also, chickens are gross and kind of scary. So here I was, I was back at square one, right? I tried to start this charity and that didn't work. I tried to start this chicken farm and that bombed. And I was back kind of at square one. And one of the things that I've realized over the last several years of running this company is that we can often get so obsessed with the solution, right? We believe that I'm the person that came up with this idea, or I have this specific skill set, or this specific experience or idea, so I'm going to bring it to the table, and then I'm going to defend it, right? I'm going to only ask the questions that I think are going to reaffirm what I already believe. I'm going to only do the thing that's going to make this look like a great idea. And the reality is we end up getting so obsessed with the solution that we're not solving the problem in the best possible way. We're not solving the problem in the way that's the most creative, that's the most innovative, and that's the most sustainable. I think it's when we come to the table actually obsessed with the problem itself and a little bit more solutions agnostic that we start to create something that really, really fits the market, that fits the need, and that ultimately solves the problem in the best possible way. So I designed a pair of strappy, funky sandals, spent weeks, months traveling around the region, trying to find materials and cobble together a little supply chain. And I went to the school and I hired 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. And I promised those young women that if they made these sandals for the next 9 months, that they would go to college in the fall. And I came back home to the US and I started selling kind of crappy, strappy leather sandals out of the back of my car, which is definitely what your parents want you doing with that master's degree in journalism they helped you pay for. So here's the thing. Everything was terrible. Everything was barely holding on by a thread, right? Our supply chain was very rickety. Our factory floor literally consisted of 3 women sitting underneath a mango tree with some leather scraps and some rubber scraps. The sandals were nothing like what I envisioned and what I knew long-term I wanted. But I had run out of time and I ran out of money, right? And so I had to go home and I had to start making money and I had to start trying to sell what I had in order to start cash flowing this idea. And in hindsight, I am so grateful for running out of time and running out of money because it forced me to market, right? It forced me to go to market with a product that I knew wasn't perfect, but that was good enough. It was good enough to get the job done. And that's when we really start learning, right? That's when we start getting the most interesting feedback. Do people like this product? Do they not? Is the price point right? How am I telling the story? How am I communicating and connecting people with it? So often we stay in the planning and research phase for far too long. And I believe that we do that because we're really afraid, right? Because you can't really fail in the research and in the planning. And I'm a really big believer in saying, okay, what is the minimum amount of work that we can put into this before we can get it out, start receiving feedback, knowing that this isn't the final product, that we're going to continue to iterate and to grow on that. So I came back home to the US, started selling these sandals out of the back of my car. I got married when I got home from Uganda, literally 4 days after I got home. My now husband was on his knees proposing to me. And, I was in Uganda for kind of a long time and we didn't talk that much, so we had a lot to catch up on. And he's like down on his knees, I'm sure saying something very poetic and romantic. And in my head, I'm thinking like, oh, do I tell him now or after our bank accounts are conjoined that I promised 3 girls I'd pay for them to go to college if my little Sandal idea doesn't work out. So I waited until after we joined our bank accounts. Worked out well. He quit his full-time job. We traveled across the U.S. Trying to launch this brand, and a big part of that was trying to find stores that would carry the product, right? So we went all over the U.S. and found about 500 stores that would carry the product, and did that for probably about 4 years. And about 4 years into it, we were building the manufacturing, we were building this wholesale business. We sat back and we had hit some really big milestones in Uganda that we were really excited about. And so we kind of sat back and we started asking a question that we try to continually ask ourselves that I think is a really, really dangerous question to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, as a creator, as a leader. And I think it's actually really important that we ask ourselves this question, not when everything is falling apart and is on fire, but actually when things are going kind of fine and they're going well and you're kind of chugging along. And that is, this is good, this is fine, but could it be even better? And creating a culture that always answers that question with yes. One of the things that we do in our company is we have what we refer to as magic wand time. And magic wand time are these meetings, if you get invited to a magic wand meeting, what the rules are, that you come in and every statement starts with, if I had a magic wand, this is what I would do. And everyone in the meeting is not allowed to do anything except lean in and look at you and go, wow. And you guys, it sounds so cheesy. And you know that everyone's just doing it because that's the rule, right? It's like intellectually that's what's happening. But the reality is it changes the entire spirit of the room, right? It goes from being this thing where we immediately start saying, well, how are we going to do it? How are we going to pay for it? Who has the capacity to do that? And instead we create this just space for kind of wonder to set in a little bit and for these really, really big ideas to take root before we start hacking them to death with the how and with the who's going to pay for it and where's the money going to come from. Obviously, those conversations eventually have to happen, but creating spaces in our culture for a little bit of wonder and for a little bit of how and for a little bit of belief that we can, in fact, make it better, I believe, is incredibly important. So we sat back and we kind of asked this question, and we really came back to this idea that everyone wants to be a hero in an interesting story, right? I would go and I would share the Seiko story, and I would have women afterwards approach me, or students in college, or people, that were 10 years into their corporate career that were feeling dead inside. And basically what they were saying to me is I want to be an impact entrepreneur. I want to use my skills and my passion to build something that actually has meaning in the world, but I'm so paralyzed. I have no idea what the first step is. And we took that piece of information that seems like it should be completely separate from how we're thinking about getting retail accounts and increasing our sell-through and our turnover and our inventory. And we thought about maybe those two things could actually go together, because it seems like there is a groundswell of people who want to be impact entrepreneurs, but they actually have no idea where to start. And we started dreaming about, could we actually hijack the retail side of our model in the same way that we've hijacked the manufacturing side to create community and opportunity? We made a really big decision. And this is 5 years into our business. We decided to shut down our wholesale channel, which represented about 70% of our revenue at the time, take all of our products off of the shelves of standard brick and mortar retail, also because brick and mortar retail is not the future of retail. And we put the product and the brand and the impact into the hands of women in their own communities and said, you go out and you share the story, you style your friends, you earn an income, build a business and a life of true meaning and purpose and impact. And we launched this thing called the Seiko Fellows Program. We had product channel fit in a new way because we started thinking about how do we take ourselves out of the center and instead invite other people to come in and be the hero. And in the first full year of running the Seiko Fellows Program, we did more in revenue than we had ever done through our wholesale channel. This is a story about a woman named Alyssa and Jovian. Alyssa is from southern Missouri. She grew up in a rural family. She kind of had to fight her way to get through college. She went through college. What she really wanted to do was get a performing arts degree, but instead she got a marketing degree because that's what her family wanted her to do. She went on and she got a marketing job at a huge engineering firm in Indiana, was making a good living, but feeling like pretty empty and pretty unfulfilled inside. I met Alyssa when she applied for a marketing job at our company, and we didn't hire her, but I said, you should really apply to be a fellow, and she did. Within a year of becoming a fellow, she had made enough income to replace her full-time job. This year, her team alone will do over $1 million in sales for our company. And I asked her about 3 months ago, I looked at her and I said, Alyssa, who was the first person that told you that you were a leader? And she looked at me and she said, you were. You're going to do $1 million in sales for me in your first 2 years of running a business, and I was the first person to tell you that you were a leader? And she looked at me very seriously and said yes. Last year, I took Alyssa to Uganda with me to meet our colleagues in East Africa. And she met with Jovian, who is her Seiko sister. Every fellow gets matched up with a woman in East Africa, and they start to form a relationship. And they met each other for the first time. And Jovian wrote Alyssa this letter. And we went back to the hotel, and we were kind of processing the day and talking about it. And Alyssa just started crying. And I was like, Alyssa, what are you crying about? And she was crying about this letter that Jovian had written to her. And Jovian wrote her this letter, and she had a remarkably similar past, right? Grew up in a rural family of people who laughed at her when she told her what her actual dreams were, of said it couldn't be done, that told her to play it safe, that told her, that you actually shouldn't dream that big. It's kind of embarrassing, right? And then she met this woman from halfway across the world who's selling her sandals in America, and this woman told her, actually, you're better than that. Actually, I believe in you, and actually, you're a leader. And Alyssa was the first person who had ever spoke that over Jovian. Y'all, part about being a leader is about saying, it's not about being the person that blazes the trail for the purpose of blazing the trail. It's about being the person who builds the bridge so that you can get out of the way and allow other people to walk over that bridge and to find their stories and to build lives of purpose and passion and impact and to become the heroes in their own stories. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow, Liz.
Also, I have a disclaimer. That's not, I feel really bad, and I shouldn't just say this. That's actually Sarah and Winnie, and it's the wrong picture. And I looked up there, and I was like, oh my God, that's not Alyssa. Anyway, I can show you a picture of Alyssa and Jovian, but that's Sarah and Winnie. They're also amazing. I couldn't decide if in the moment I should lie about their names or lie about the picture. Anyway.
Thank you for your honesty.
You're welcome. I'm going to be able to sleep at night.
I kind of feel like we should cancel all the speakers today and just pick your brain now.
That's very sweet.
That was incredible. Thank you. Can we give her a hand one more time? I have so many questions, but little time. But I'm going to try to ask you a couple. Now, here's the big thing with you. You run a for-profit business. And a lot of people that are cause-driven with their organizations are nonprofit, and you mentioned that. And I know that there's a tension in that world of being for-profit, and there's people that look at you and they're like, well, you can't really build a cause-driven company and be for-profit. And what do you say about that? What's your perspective that you would say to that question?
It used to bother me a lot more, and now I'm just like, yeah, you can, bye. Because it's to us, the tension, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it actually feels like our impact and our mission and our story is so baked into the core of what we're doing that it doesn't feel like a cost. And there's so many things that we can look at that actually have real financial, monetary value that are 100% due to our mission and our impact, that I just think the argument for it isn't great. For instance, typical manufacturing turnover rate, if you go to a factory in China, you're going to see 30 to 50% turnover every year, right? The average factory worker in China is going to stay at that factory for maybe 9 months. And the minute a new opportunity comes up, the minute someone pays them literally $5 more a month, they're like, peace out, I'm going on to the next thing. In the last 8 years, we've had, I think, maybe 4 people on our manufacturing team leave and go take jobs somewhere else. And all 4 of those were like us being like, this is what you were really created. This was your launch pad. Go do the other thing, right? That is an incredibly real cost savings, right? To have a manufacturing team that is that committed to the mission, that is that bought into the culture, that is that dedicated to quality, but also to seeing women go on to university, that they're saying, like, I want to build my careers here at that company. And that's something that the vast majority of people, specifically in manufacturing, can't say. And that wouldn't happen if what we were doing wasn't trying to completely revamp manufacturing culture, and instead saying, like, hey, you're not an invisible cog in the machine. Like, you are, in that kind of concept of, like, be the hero, right? That's how we think about manufacturing, right? How do we set up this producer, this, line worker to be the hero of this story and to be the hero of the manufacturing side of our business and to take incredible pride, to be treated really well and with dignity. And the reality is that creates a sense of loyalty and a retention that's actually really important. Now that we're in the direct sales business, one of the main KPIs, so there's 3 things that matter in my industry. It's how many people are selling your product, it's how productive they are, how much they're selling, and it's how long they're going to stick around, so the retention rate. Y'all, can you imagine, like, the retention rate that we have for women? We just brought a group of 11 women over to East Africa, and just yesterday I was texting with one of our fellows, and she had sent me a picture of this letter that one of our employees wrote to her daughter, her daughter lives in rural Pennsylvania. She has this big dream that she wants to go to MIT and she wants to be the first person on Mars, right? Not a thing that a lot of young girls in rural Pennsylvania are dreaming about, and she faces a lot of social pressure, and she gets made fun of and she gets laughed at. And one of our team members in Uganda, who is also an 18-year-old girl, who her big dream is that she wants to be a scientist and she wants to go to Antarctica, right? And you can imagine she's been laughed out of a lot of rooms for that dream. And this young woman wrote my fellow's daughter this, like, beautiful letter. Y'all, I could read it to you and I swear you all would be weeping. I mean, it's just like, only the brave survive, and I know you can do it, and you have a sister across the world that's cheering you on. And, like, as a mother, to see that interaction, and now her daughter's like, I have to go meet her. Like, I have to go, I have to be a part of this. Talk about retention. It's like, I feel very confident that this woman will be with us. She'll build a career with us over the next 10 years, and that's really, really rare in our industry, where people are normally just, like, hopping from one thing to the next thing, trying to make a quick buck. So that being said, I think that there's a real, outside of the philosophical, let's go, like, make a difference in the world, which is obviously what drove me in the first place, there's an actual, real financial and sustainability component to being a mission-driven business.
Wow, that's awesome. So you made some bold moves. You moved across to Africa. You made some big shifts even with your company as you moved away from the physical stores. There are entrepreneurs in here who have this dream in their hearts, like, hey, I want to be cause-driven, and I want to make people heroes, and I want to do this kind of stuff. But they're stuck in the everyday life where they're just earning their pay and paying lots of money for their house here in Silicon Valley. To live here. What would you say is, like, okay, what's a couple practical steps that you can just start taking now to move this direction of being like that?
Well, living in the back of a Honda Element is actually not as bad as you would think. I feel like I can tell you that from experience. Here's the thing. We have a whole society that is just built on fear, right? Like, it's built on fear, and it makes people think that they're not in control. And it's just like, y'all, that's like, you're in control. You get to decide where you live and how much your mortgage is and where your kids are going to, like, there's all of these unspoken rules that so many people feel like, but I have to do this. And then you look at them and you're like, but do you have to? Who's telling you have to do that? And really kind of getting to the root of, like, why do you feel like this is the decision you need to make? And I find that for living in a culture that is so individualistic and that's so, like, we're pioneers, we live in a lot. I am shocked by the lack of autonomy that a lot of people feel like they have over their lives, their careers, the decisions that they're making. And I think that one of the most courageous things that we can do is to really listen to kind of ourselves and our inner voice and say, so many people, they're like, I want to build this life of passion and purpose and impact. And they say that that's the game they want to win. But the reality is the rules that they're playing by are the rules of a game that say, like, be safe, make decisions everybody's going to approve in, make sure you make as few failures as possible because failing's really embarrassing and you should always save face. And so I think really making sure that it's like your vision for the life that you want to live and the person that you really believe that you were created to be and getting closer to that is actually aligning with the rules that you're playing by. And if they're not, starting to really dig in and say, why do I feel like I need to play by these rules?
Wow, are you hiring?
Yes, you can be a fellow.
So, hey, people that want to stay in touch with you, learn more, hear more about your story, and follow you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, so you can head to our website at Seiko, SSEKO, designs.com. You can join our email newsletter. We would love for you, if you're interested in becoming more a part of the mission and earning some free, amazing product, you can host a Seiko trunk show. So we'll connect you with a stylist in your area who will come over. She'll share the story, tell you about the impact, but also get you hooked up with some amazing Seiko swag. Or you could join the team and become a Seiko fellow and build your own impact enterprise alongside of us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Can we
you
give her
so
a hand
much,
one more
everybody.
time?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me.